At exactly 7:40 every morning, without fail, a man would walk into a small railway cafe beside Platform 2 in York, England, remove his hat with the same quiet precision, sit in the same wooden chair near the window, and order the same cup of tea. Strong, without sugar, never anything different, never anything more. He did this every single day for nearly 11 years, through winters that froze the edges of the tracks and summers that filled the air with dust and heat, through rain, fog, and mornings when the platform was nearly empty. No one questioned it, no one found it unusual, and over time he became less of a person and more of a routine, something as fixed as the train schedule itself, something that belonged to the place as much as the worn tables and the faint smell of coal smoke that lingered in the air. Until the morning of September 18th, 1903, when he died, and yet the very next day at exactly 7:40, someone was still sitting in his seat. The cafe was narrow and dimly lit, tucked against the edge of the railway platform, its windows often clouded by steam from boiling kettles and the constant breath of passing trains. The wooden floor creaked under footsteps. The chairs carried the marks of years of use, and the air was always filled with the low murmur of early travelers who came and went without leaving anything behind. It was not a place people remembered for long, but for those who came every day it became part of life, a quiet space between arrival and departure. And among all those passing faces, one remained constant. His name was Henry Calloway, a man in his late 50s, with a narrow face, tired eyes, and a presence that never demanded attention but was impossible to ignore once noticed. He dressed simply, always in a dark wool coat, his hat worn but carefully kept, his movements controlled and deliberate, as though every action had been practiced so many times it no longer required thought. "Tea," he would say each morning, placing the exact coins on the table before the waitress even arrived, his voice low, steady, and never changing. He did not smile, did not linger in conversation, did not ask questions. He sat, he drank, and he watched. Always the same direction. Always the same moment. The train that arrived at 8 o'clock paused briefly and left again at 8:05. Henry never boarded that train, not once in 11 years. He simply watched it, his gaze fixed, his posture still, as though he were waiting for something that never came. The younger staff found it strange, though they never said it too loudly. "He doesn't even blink when the train comes," one boy whispered once, leaning slightly to get a better look. But Mrs. Dalloway, who had worked there longer than most could remember, only shook her head and said quietly, "He's not watching the train. He's waiting for someone on it." No one asked how she knew. Perhaps she didn't. Perhaps it was just the kind of understanding that comes from seeing the same thing every day for too many years. As time passed, Henry became part of the place in a way that no one had intended. New workers were told about him without being told directly. "That seat by the window," they would say, "leave it ready." No one else sat there during those hours, not because they were told not to, but because it simply felt wrong. Routine had turned into something close to rule, and rule had turned into something close to quiet respect. Even the regular customers adjusted themselves around him without realizing it, leaving space, lowering their voices slightly, as though something about his presence demanded silence. But routine only feels permanent until it ends. On September 18th, 1903, Henry Calloway did not arrive at 7:40. At first, it went unnoticed. The morning was busy, the platform filled with movement, the cafe alive with the usual rush of early travelers. But by 7:45, Mrs. Dalloway glanced toward the empty chair and felt something settle in her chest, something she could not immediately explain. By 7:50, she had looked toward the door more times than she realized. "He's late," one of the younger workers said casually, but she shook her head without even thinking. "He's never late," she replied. There was something final in the way she said it, as though the idea itself did not belong in reality. At 8:05, the train came and left. The chair remained empty, and for the first time in 11 years, the routine broke. The news came quietly, carried not through announcement but through conversation. A man had been found collapsed near his home earlier that morning, sometime before sunrise. By the time help arrived, there was nothing that could be done. Henry Calloway was dead. The cause was his heart, sudden and without warning, the kind of ending that leaves no room for explanation. By afternoon, it had been accepted. By evening, it had been understood. And by night, it had already begun to feel like something that belonged to the past. But the next morning changed that. On September 19th, 1903, the cafe opened as it always did. The same tables, the same kettle, the same quiet rhythm. And at exactly 7:40, as the clock on the wall marked the moment with quiet certainty, Mrs. Dalloway turned toward the window out of habit, expecting nothing, and yet feeling something she could not name. And then she saw it. The chair was not empty. Someone was sitting there. Not clearly, not sharply, but enough to recognize the shape, the posture, the stillness. Her breath caught, her hand tightening slightly around the tray she held. "Sir?" she said, her voice careful, measured, as she stepped closer. The figure did not respond, did not move. The light from the window touched the side of his face, but not enough to show it fully, just enough to suggest familiarity, just enough to feel wrong. She blinked, and in that brief moment the chair was empty again. She said nothing, not because she did not want to, but because she did not know how. Some things, once spoken, become real in a way that cannot be undone. And this did not feel like something that should be made real. Days passed before it happened again, and this time she was not alone. A railway worker named James Holloway stopped mid-step, his eyes fixed on the same chair, his expression shifting from confusion to something closer to recognition. "That's him," he said quietly, almost to himself. Mrs. Dalloway turned quickly, and for a moment she saw it again. The same still figure, sitting exactly as Henry always had, facing the tracks, waiting. "That's not possible," she whispered, but James did not move. "I saw him every day," he said. "That's Henry." And yet, when others turned to look, the chair was empty once more. After that, the stories began to grow. Some claimed they had seen him. Others dismissed it entirely. But the pattern remained. Every now and then, at exactly 7:40, someone would be there. Not long, not fully, just enough to be noticed. Just enough to make people question what they thought they understood about endings. And then, as quietly as it appeared, it would be gone again. Months later, Mrs. Dalloway found something small, something easily overlooked, tucked inside the cafe ledger where Henry had always placed his coins. A folded piece of paper, worn at the edges, written in a careful hand she recognized immediately. There was no name, no date, no explanation. Only one line. She said she would come back on the 8:05 train. And suddenly, the years made sense. The waiting, the silence, the routine that never changed. Henry Calloway had not been sitting there without reason. He had been waiting, every morning, for 11 years, watching the same train arrive and leave, holding on to something that never returned. And perhaps, even after death, some habits do not end, some waiting does not stop, and some people remain, exactly where they last hoped to see someone again. And now, I want to ask you something. If you believed someone was coming back, would you keep waiting, even if it meant spending your entire life in the same place, watching the same moment repeat itself, or would you eventually accept that some promises are never kept? Tell me your answer in the comments, and if stories like this stay with you long after they end, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay for the next story.